The Crimson Riders were the most feared gang in the Pacific Northwest. From Portland's rain-slicked streets to Seattle's shadowy ports, they'd built an empire of fear, crushing anyone who dared stand in their way. But on a golden autumn morning, in the quiet town of Evergreen Harbor, they made a mistake that would destroy everything they'd built. They didn't just vandalize a little girl's lemonade stand. They crushed the dreams of a child raising money for wounded veterans. A girl who kept her father's worn Navy SEAL trident next to her donation jar. They thought it was just another easy target, another way to show their power. They were wrong, dead wrong. What they didn't know, what nobody in town knew, was that Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison was about to return early from deployment. And in just a few hours, this decorated Navy SEAL would teach these hardened criminals the difference between those who use fear to appear strong and those who face real danger to protect others. The morning sun painted long shadows across the well-kept streets of Evergreen Harbor, where maple trees lined the sidewalks in their autumn glory. 12-year-old Emma Morrison carefully arranged mason jars on her freshly painted lemonade stand, each one gleaming in the early light. The stand itself was a labor of love, its crisp white wood and navy blue trim standing proud against the backdrop of Memorial Park. A handwritten sign declared, "Emma's Lemonade for Heroes. All proceeds help wounded veterans at Pacific Grove, VA Hospital." Next to the donation jar sat a photograph in a simple silver frame, her father in his dress blues receiving the silver star. Emma adjusted it slightly, making sure it caught the light just right. "Details matter, sweetheart," he always said. Those words echoed in her mind as she lined up each jar with precision, just as he'd taught her. Mrs. Eleanor Chen, her silver-streaked hair caught in the morning light, approached with measured steps. She'd been Emma's first customer every morning since the stand opened 3 months ago. "Good morning, dear," she called out, her warm smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "First customer of the day, right on schedule." "Right on time, Mrs. Chen," Emma smiled, already reaching for the jar with extra ice, just how her favorite customer liked it. "How's Mr. Chen doing with his physical therapy?" "Better, thanks to the programs at Pacific Grove. The new equipment your fundraising help provide has made such a difference." Eleanor watched as Emma carefully poured the lemonade, her movements precise and practiced. 3 months now, isn't it?" 3 months and 16 days, Emma replied, her hands moving with quiet efficiency. "We're almost at our goal for the new rehabilitation equipment. Dr. Martinez says it'll help veterans recover faster, especially the ones with combat injuries like Dad had." Eleanor placed a $20 bill in the donation jar, waving away Emma's attempt to make change. "Keep it, dear. What you're doing here, it matters." She paused, her expression growing serious. "But Emma, there's been talk. The Crimson Riders, they've been moving closer to town. Maybe you should take a break just for a while." Emma's hands tightened slightly on the jar she was holding, but her voice remained steady. "Dad always says, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right, especially when you are afraid." The distant rumble of motorcycles made Eleanor glance nervously over her shoulder, but Emma continued, "Besides, he'll be home soon. Just 2 more months. Sometimes I forget you're only 12. Then aside, her eyes soft with concern. "You seem so much older." The motorcycle sounds grew closer, then faded again. Eleanor hurried away, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts. She remembered the day they built this stand, just before her father's deployment. The memory was crystal clear, the smell of fresh-cut wood, the sound of his laughter as they argued over paint colors, the warmth of the summer sun on their backs. "The world can be a scary place, Pumpkin," he told her, helping her measure the wood. "But you know what's stronger than fear? Love, kindness. The choice to help others even when it's hard, that's real strength. Emma touched the Silver Star medal pinned next to her father's photograph. He'd earned it, saving his entire team during a mission she wasn't supposed to know the details of. But word got around in a military town like Evergreen Harbor. The medal reminded her that real heroes didn't seek out fights. They stood up for what was right, no matter the cost. The shadow that fell across her stand pulled Emma from her memories. Two men in leather vests stood there, crimson riders' patches visible on their backs. The taller one, a toothpick dangling from his lips, smirked. "Well, ain't this precious? Playing business, are we?" Emma met his gaze steadily, just as her father had taught her. "Would you like some lemonade, sir? It's for a good cause." The shorter one laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Hear that, Snake?" "Sir." Real polite, this one. Too bad politeness don't pay protection fees in this neighborhood. Snake leaned forward, his toothpick pointing at Emma's donation jar. "Nice collection you got there. Be a shame if something happened to this pretty little stand of yours." "This money is for wounded veterans." Emma's voice remained calm, though her heart raced. "My dad, he needed this kind of equipment after his last deployment. I promised him I'd help other families like ours." "Ain't that sweet?" Snake's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "But promises don't mean much in this town. Not anymore. Crimson Riders run things now. Remember that." They swaggered away, leaving behind the acrid smell of leather and cigarette smoke. Emma watched them go, her father's words echoing in her mind. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with fists, but with the courage to stand up for what's right. Down the street, Tom Sullivan stood in the doorway of his hardware store, watching the bikers leave. He pulled out his phone and dialed with grim determination. "Officer Rivera? Yeah, it's Tom. Think we might have trouble brewing. The Crimson Riders. They're sniffing around Jack Morrison's girl." The morning wore on, each minute heavy with unspoken tension. Regular customers came and went, their smiles a bit too bright, their departures a bit too hurried. But Emma stayed at her post, serving lemonade and collecting donations, refusing to let fear win. As the sun climbed higher, more Crimson Riders cruised past, each pass slower than the last. They were testing, watching, waiting, but they didn't know what kind of strength they were up against. Not just a little girl's determination, but the legacy of a father who had taught her that true courage means standing firm in the face of fear. And they certainly didn't know that at that very moment, thousands of miles away, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison was boarding a transport that would bring him home early. The Crimson Riders were about to learn a lesson about real power, about the difference between those who intimidate and those who protect. But for now, Emma simply straightened her father's photograph once more, poured another glass of lemonade, and stood her ground just like he taught her. The afternoon heat shimmered above the pavement as 3 motorcycles rounded the corner onto Harbor Street. Leading them was Marcus "Blade" Cooper, his massive black Harley rumbling like distant thunder. The Crimson Riders' leader pulled to a stop across from Emma's lemonade stand, cutting his engine with practiced precision. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Blade studied the stand through mirrored sunglasses, taking in every detail: the carefully painted signs, the donation jar, the photograph of Commander Morrison. His leather vest, adorned with patches marking territories claimed and rivals defeated, creaked as he dismounted. "So this is what's got Snake all worked up." Blade's voice carried the gravelly edge of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. "A kid's lemonade stand?" Behind him, Ray Switchblade Martinez spat on the ground. "Ain't just any kid, boss. That's Morrison's girl, the SEAL." "That right?" Blade's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well, ain't that interesting?" Emma watched their approach, her mother's last words echoing in her memory. It was 3 years ago in that sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and endings. "Promise me something, sweetheart," Catherine had whispered, her once strong voice barely audible. "Promise me you'll keep that light inside you burning. The world needs more brightness." "I promise, Mom," Emma had answered, holding her mother's too thin hand. "And promise you'll look after your father. He pretends to be so strong, but his heart, it's like yours. So big it hurts sometimes." Now, watching Blade approach, Emma straightened her spine. She wouldn't let that light go out. Not today, not ever. "What can I get for you, sir?" Her voice remained steady. Blade removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes like chips of ice. "Cute setup you got here, real cute. Making much money for those wounded vets?" "We're doing okay." Emma's hands remained still on the counter. "Would you like some lemonade?" "What I'd like," Blade leaned forward, "is for you to understand how things work in Evergreen Harbor these days. See, nothing happens in this town without the Crimson Riders getting their cut. Nothing." From his hardware store doorway, Tom Sullivan watched the scene unfold, his phone already pressed to his ear. "Maria, they're here." Blade himself. "Yeah, I know you're short-handed, but..." Officer Maria Rivera's patrol car rounded the corner, lights flashing but sirens silent. She stepped out, one hand resting casually on her holster. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Enjoying some lemonade?" "Officer," Blade's voice dripped contempt. "Just having a friendly chat with the young entrepreneur here." "That right?" Maria's eyes scanned the scene. "Emma, everything okay?" "Yes, Officer Rivera. I was just explaining our donation program. All proceeds help veterans at Pacific Grove VA Hospital." Blade's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, something dark flickering behind his eyes at the mention of the hospital. "How noble," he sneered. "But nobility don't pay the bills, does it? Don't pay for protection." "This is a children's charity, Blade." Maria's voice hardened. "Even you can't be that low. Everything needs protection these days, officer. Everything and everyone." Blade turned back to Emma. "Your daddy being away and all. Be a shame if something happened while he was gone." Eleanor Chen emerged from her house, phone in hand. "I just got off the phone with Channel 7 News. They're very interested in doing a story about Emma's fundraising efforts. Should make for good publicity." Blade's expression shifted slightly. The Crimson Riders might rule through fear, but they preferred to operate in shadows. Media attention was bad for business. "We'll continue this discussion later," he mounted his bike. "Think about what I said, little girl, about protection, about how quick things can change." The bikes roared away, leaving behind tension thick enough to cut. Eleanor hurried to Emma's side. "I didn't really call the news," she admitted, "but I thought it was quick thinking." "Mrs. Chen," Maria nodded appreciatively. "Emma, maybe it's time to pack up for today." "No." Emma's voice was quiet but firm. "Mom always said darkness wins when good people back down." Later that afternoon, Dr. Sarah Martinez visited the stand, her VA hospital ID still clipped to her white coat. "Emma, honey, we heard about the Crimson Riders. Nobody would blame you if you wanted to stop." "How's Mr. Chen doing?" Emma asked instead. "Has he tried the new physical therapy equipment yet?" Dr. Martinez's expression softened. "He has. Says it helps him feel like a Marine again, at least for a little while." "Then I'm not stopping," Emma began, wiping down the counter. "Dad says courage is contagious. Maybe if people see me standing up to them." At the Crimson Riders clubhouse on the outskirts of town, Blade stood before a wall of photographs, his fingers tracing one in particular. A young man in desert camouflage, his face forever young, forever smiling. The date stamp showed 3 years ago. Around the same time, the VA hospital had denied extended rehabilitation coverage for certain high-risk treatments. "Military families," he spat the words like poison, "think they're better than everyone else, think their service gives them special rights." "Boss," Switchblade approached cautiously, "about the Morrison girl." "Send a message tonight." Blade didn't turn around. "Nothing too rough. Just remind them nobody's untouchable in this town, not even a SEAL's daughter." As darkness fell over Evergreen Harbor, Emma packed up her stand for the night. The donation jar was fuller than usual. It seemed some people had been inspired to give more, a quiet rebellion against the morning's threats. She was just securing the last latch when the first rock shattered her carefully painted sign. More followed, accompanied by the sound of cruel laughter from the darkness. "First warning," a voice called out. "There won't be a second." Emma stood amid the wreckage of her stand, glass from broken mason jars glittering like tears in the streetlight. But she didn't cry. Instead, she pulled out her phone and took pictures of the damage, documenting everything just like her father had taught her. "Sometimes the best weapon isn't a gun or a fist," he told her once. "Sometimes it's the truth, revealed at just the right moment." In the growing darkness, Emma Morrison began to plan. The Crimson Riders thought they were teaching her about fear. Instead, they were about to learn about strength, not the kind that breaks things, but the kind that refuses to break. Dawn painted Evergreen Harbor in shades of gold as Emma swept broken glass from the sidewalk. Each piece caught the light, reminding her of the stars she and her father used to count during his survival training lessons. The lemonade stand's bright paint was now scarred with impact marks, but remained standing, bent, not broken. "Officer." Rivera crouched nearby, examining one of the larger rocks. They weren't trying to destroy it completely. This was about sending a message. "I got the message," Emma replied, carefully picking up pieces of her mother's mason jars. "They want me to be afraid, but Mom always said fear only wins if you let it." Halfway around the world, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison sat in a military transport studying a photo on his satellite phone. The image showed Emma's vandalized stand, sent by Tom Sullivan with a simple message. "She needs you, Jack." "Earlier than planned, sir." A young lieutenant approached. "We're wheels up in 20, Jack nodded, his weathered face revealing nothing of the calculations running through his mind. 15 years of special operations had taught him patience, strategy, and the importance of understanding an enemy before engaging. The Crimson Riders were about to learn those same lessons. At Pacific Grove VA Hospital, Emma made her weekly visit, this time without lemonade to share. Michael Chen, a former Marine fighting to walk again, noticed immediately. "Where's our special delivery?" he asked from his physical therapy mat, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort of his exercises. "Had a little setback," Emma admitted, sitting beside him. "But I'm not giving up. Dad says setbacks are just setups for comebacks." "Is it true," Michael lowered his voice, "about the Crimson Riders?" "Michael," Dr. Martinez warned from the doorway, but Emma raised her hand. "It's okay. Yes, it's true. But you know what else is true? I'm still here, still fighting, just like you." In the Crimson Riders clubhouse, tension simmered beneath the surface. Ray Switchblade Martinez paced the worn floorboards, his massive frame casting long shadows in the dim light. "A kid's lemonade stand, boss? For wounded vets? Some of the guys are saying it's too far." Blade's fist slammed into the bar, making bottles rattle. "Too far? Was it too far when my brother bled out in the sand waiting for evac? When they said there weren't enough resources, while other units got priority? While they were building their fancy new VA wings, Tyler died in a field hospital because we weren't priority patients." "That was different," Snake interjected. "Tyler's dead." Blade's voice cracked slightly. "While they're funding their special programs, building their state-of-the-art facilities for their chosen few, my brother died because we weren't part of their elite club." Back in town, Eleanor Chen moved through Evergreen Harbor like a quiet revolution, knocking on doors, making calls, rallying support. Some turned her away, fear evident in their eyes. Others listened, remembering times when the town stood together against threats. Catherine Morrison volunteered at every veterans event. Eleanor reminded Mrs. Peterson at the diner. "Now her daughter needs us. Are we really going to let these thugs win?" Tom Sullivan's hardware store, became an unofficial headquarters for resistance. Local contractors quietly donated supplies to repair the stand. Teenagers offered to take shifts watching over it. Small acts of defiance bloomed like wildflowers through cracks in the Crimson Rider's control. Officer Rivera knew it wouldn't be enough. "They'll escalate," she told Tom over coffee. "Blade's got something to prove now. If the community rallies around Emma..." "When," Tom corrected. "When the community rallies around her." At the hospital, Dr. Martinez reviewed Tyler Cooper's old files, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It wasn't about military families getting priority," she explained to her staff. "His trauma was too severe. No amount of resources could have saved him. But Blade needed someone to blame, and now he's targeting a child to what? Get revenge. Sometimes the deepest wounds make us forget who we really are," Michael Chen said quietly, remembering the young man who'd spent every day by his brother's bedside, reading to him, making him laugh even as he slipped away. Emma spent the afternoon rebuilding, each hammer strike a quiet act of defiance. The new sign was simpler but stronger. "Every glass of lemonade helps a hero fight another day." Mrs. Chen brought fresh mason jars, pressing them into Emma's hands with tears in her eyes. "Michael asked me to bring these, said if you can keep fighting, so can he." A motorcycle's rumble approached, making everyone tense, but it was just a delivery rider grabbing a quick lemonade between runs. Still, Emma noticed how his eyes darted nervously toward the street, how his hand shook slightly as he handed over his money. "They can't hurt everyone," Emma said quietly. "Not if we stand together." "Brave words, kid," the rider replied. "But Blade, he's got nothing left to lose. That makes him dangerous." In the growing dusk, Blade stood before the wall of photographs in his office, Tyler's smile frozen in time. "You'd hate what I've become, wouldn't you, little brother?" he whispered. "But I couldn't save you, couldn't make them listen. Now they'll have to listen." He turned to Snake and Switchblade, his face set like stone. "Tomorrow we show this town what happens when they defy us. Not just the stand this time. Send a message they can't ignore." Switchblade shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe you should remember who saved you when you had nothing." Blade cut him off. "Who gave you a family when nobody else would? Or maybe you'd rather side with them." The threat hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything it touched. But in Switchblade's eyes, something flickered. A memory of who he'd been before, when wearing patches meant being part of something honorable. As night fell over Evergreen Harbor, two forces gathered strength. In the Crimson Rider's clubhouse, Blade planned his demonstration of power, unaware that with each escalation he was proving something entirely different than he intended. And in a military transport crossing, the ocean, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison studied satellite maps of his hometown, planning not for revenge, but for redemption. Because sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with fists or fear, but with the courage to offer understanding to those who've forgotten how to receive it. The Crimson Riders struck at dawn, moving through Evergreen Harbor like a poisonous tide. 6 bikes roared down Harbor Street, their riders carrying baseball bats and chains. But as they approached Emma's lemonade stand, they found something unexpected. People waiting for them. Tom Sullivan stood at the front, his weathered hands steady on a wooden baseball bat. Behind him, a dozen townspeople formed a protective circle around the stand. Eleanor Chen sat in her lawn chair, calmly dialing her phone. "Morning, boys," Tom called out as the bike slowed. "Bit early for lemonade, isn't it?" Snake revved his engine threateningly. "This doesn't concern you, old man. Walk away." "See, that's where you're wrong," Tom stepped forward. "This stopped being about just one stand when you decided to threaten a child. Our children." At a military base 3 states away, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison signed the last of his emergency leave papers. The young clerk's eyes widened. "At his service record, sir, you're listed as arriving tomorrow, but there's no transport until..." "There's always a way home, son." Jack's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "When it matters enough." Back in Evergreen Harbor, Emma sat in the hospital's research library, scrolling through old newspaper archives. The headline caught her eye. "Local man dies in combat zone. Delayed medical evacuation cited." The photograph showed a younger Blade Cooper, clean-shaven and clear-eyed, in desert camouflage next to his brother. "I thought I'd find you here," Dr. Martinez said softly, sitting beside her. "You're trying to understand him, aren't you? Dad says every enemy is just a friend who's lost their way." Emma touched the screen gently. "He lost his brother in combat." "There's more to that story." Dr. Martinez pulled out a thick file. "Tyler Cooper's case. What Blade doesn't know, what he never let us explain, is that his brother's injuries were catastrophic. No amount of resources, no priority status could have changed the outcome. The delay in evacuation, it wasn't about discrimination or priority. The entire area was hot. No helicopter could have gotten in safely. Outside Tom's hardware store, chains rattled as Crimson Riders members circled the building. Inside, customers huddled away from windows as Tom calmly loaded his shotgun. "Last chance, Sullivan," Switchblade's voice boomed through the door. "Open up and pay what you owe, or we start breaking things." "Only thing I owe," Tom chambered around loudly, "is respect to this town. Something you boys seem to have forgotten." The first window shattered inward, but before more damage could be done, police sirens wailed in the distance. The bikers scattered, but not before Tom caught the look in Switchblade's eyes. Not anger, but something closer to shame. At the Crimson Riders clubhouse, internal tensions reached a breaking point. "We're supposed to be outlaws, not thugs," a younger member shouted at Blade. "There's no honor in this." "Honor?" Blade's laugh was bitter as winter. "Honor didn't save my brother. Honor didn't make those doctors help him. The only thing people understand is fear." "Maybe that's what you understand," Snake spoke up, surprising everyone. "But some of us remember when wearing these patches meant something different." Emma spent the afternoon serving lemonade under the watchful eyes of her protectors. Each glass sold felt like a small victory, each donation a quiet act of defiance against the morning's violence. "Your father would be proud," Eleanor said, watching Emma carefully count the day's earnings. "He'll be home soon." Emma's voice carried absolute certainty. 2 more months." Eleanor smiled, knowing what the girl didn't, that sometimes fathers have a way of showing up exactly when they're needed most. The confrontation at Tom's store spread through town like wildfire, igniting something that had been smoldering beneath the surface. People began to remember who they were before fear ruled their streets. Officer Rivera found Dr. Martinez waiting in her office, Tyler Cooper's complete medical file in her hands. "They need to know the truth," Sarah said. "All of it before someone gets seriously hurt." "Truth doesn't always stop violence," Maria warned. "No, but it can change the reason for fighting, give them a chance to choose something better." As evening approached, tension hung over Evergreen Harbor like storm clouds. Everyone could feel it. Something was coming. Something had to break. At the hospital, Michael Chen sat up suddenly in his bed, pointing out the window. "Look, military vehicles." A convoy rolled quietly through town, headed for the naval base. In the lead vehicle, Lieutenant Commander Jack Morrison studied his hometown through tactical eyes, noting changes, plotting approaches, identifying threats, but he wasn't planning for war. His years of special operations had taught him that the most decisive victories often come without firing a shot. The Crimson Riders thought they were fighting for territory, for respect, for revenge. They were about to learn what real warriors fight for. At the clubhouse, Blade stared at the wall of photographs, at Tyler's smile frozen in desert light. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "Tomorrow they'll understand what it means to lose everything." But even as he planned his final demonstration of power, his authority was crumbling. 3 members had already turned in their patches, unable to justify attacking children and shopkeepers. Others watched and waited, feeling the wind changing. In the growing darkness, a single figure walked into Tom's hardware. The bell chimed softly as Lieutenant Commander Morrison stepped inside, still in his combat uniform. "Welcome home, Jack," Tom said quietly. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." Sometimes circumstances are exactly what they need to be. Jack's voice was tired but determined. "Tell me everything." Outside, Evergreen Harbor settled into an uneasy night. Tomorrow would bring either restoration or reckoning. But for now, in the space between breaths, between fear and courage, between hatred and understanding, there was still time for choices to be made. And some choices, once made, change everything. Morning. Mist clung to the streets as Jack Morrison walked the path his daughter took each day. His trained eyes noted everything: sightlines, escape routes, defensive positions. But what caught his attention most were the small details. Chalk drawings on the sidewalk near the lemonade stand, encouraging messages written by neighborhood kids, a community refusing to break. The stand itself told a story. Damage repaired, with obvious care, new wood, slightly lighter than the old, fresh paint covering scars. Like his daughter, it bore its wounds with dignity. "She sets up every morning at 7, Tom said, falling into step beside him. "Won't let anyone stop her. Just like her mother." Jack's voice carried pride tinged with worry. "How bad has it gotten?" "Bad enough for me to call you, but not so bad we can't fix it." At the Crimson Riders clubhouse, Snake burst through the door, out of breath. "Boss, Morrison's back. He's here." Blade's hand froze on his coffee cup. "What do you mean here? He's not due for months." "Saw him myself, walking the streets like he owns them already, talking to Sullivan and Rivera." Blade hurled his cup against the wall, ceramic shards scattering like shrapnel. "Should have finished this yesterday. Now he thinks he can just walk in and—" "Boss," Switchblade interrupted carefully, "maybe we should think about this. He's not just some local cop, he's a man." Blade's voice turned cold. "Just a man, and men bleed." Emma was arranging her mason jars when familiar footsteps made her freeze. She knew that walk. Measured, purposeful, loving. She turned slowly, hardly daring to believe. "Hey, kiddo." Jack stood there in his civilian clothes now, but carrying himself with the same quiet strength she remembered. "Heard you might need some help with quality control." "Daddy!" She crashed into his arms, 3 months of worry and determination finally breaking free in tears. "I've got you, baby." He held her tight, feeling her shoulders shake. "I've got you." "I didn't give up," she whispered fiercely. "Just like you taught me." "I never doubted you would." He pulled back, studying her face. "Now, want to tell me about these Crimson Riders?" Across town, Officer Rivera watched through her windshield as 2 Crimson Riders members hastily removed their patches before riding away. "That's 5 who've quit since this morning," she told Dr. Martinez. "Word spreading about Morrison's return and about Tyler's file." Sarah held the thick folder on her lap. "Have you shown Blade?" "Can't get near him. He's holed up in the clubhouse, getting more paranoid by the hour." Eleanor Chen's living room filled with townspeople, voices mixing with the smell of coffee and determination. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison's return changes things," she announced. "But he can't fight this alone. Are we ready to take our town back?" At Pacific Grove VA Hospital, Michael Chen sat up excitedly as Emma entered with her father. "Is it true? Are you really a Navy SEAL?" Jack smiled, pulling up a chair. "Sure am, but today I want to hear about you. Emma tells me you're the toughest fighter she knows." "Sometimes it's hard," Michael admitted. Being scared but having to be brave anyway. Want to know a secret? That's what real courage is. Being scared but doing what's right anyway. Outside the hospital, 2 Crimson Riders members watched from their bikes. One keyed his radio. "Boss, Morrison's here with his kid. We could—" "No!" Blade's voice crackled back. "Not yet. Tonight we finish this. Some of the guys are saying we should back off. That Morrison is the reason military families get special treatment while Tyler died waiting. Their kids get—" "That's not true." Dr. Martinez's voice cut through their radio channel. She stood on the hospital steps, holding Tyler's file. "Blade, I've been trying to tell you, Tyler's case. You need to know what really happened." But the bikes were already roaring away, leaving her words hanging in the morning air. At Tom's store, Jack examined the broken window. "They're sloppy, undisciplined, running on emotion instead of strategy." "That make them less dangerous?" Tom asked. "More dangerous in some ways, but also more likely to make mistakes." The day progressed with an air of anticipation. People walked. Taller spoke more freely. Morrison's presence acted as a catalyst, crystallizing the community's scattered resistance into something more organized. Emma insisted on keeping her stand open. "Running away won't solve anything," she told her father. "Mom always said, face your fears in the daylight," he finished with a sad smile. "She was the bravest person I ever knew. Until today." She squeezed his hand. "The Crimson Riders, they're hurting too, aren't they? Like we hurt when Mom died. Pain either breaks us or transforms us," Jack said quietly. "The choice is always ours." At the clubhouse, that choice hung heavy in the air. Switchblade watched Blade cleaning his guns with methodical precision, remembering the man who'd given him a second chance years ago. "Boss, maybe we should hear what the doctor has to say about Tyler." Blade's movements never slowed. "Only thing I need to hear is whether you're with me or against me." "You know I'm with you." Switchblade's voice carried the weight of loyalty, struggling against conscience. "Always have been, but this path we're on..." Evening painted Evergreen Harbor in shades of amber and shadow. Jack stood at his daughter's lemonade stand where it had all begun and where it would all end. His satellite phone buzzed with a message. "From Officer Rivera, they're mobilizing, all of them, coming your way." Jack typed back 2 words. "Good, ready." Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't won with fists or firepower, but with the courage to offer understanding to those who've forgotten how to receive it. And as darkness fell over Evergreen Harbor, 2 men prepared to lead their people into conflict. One driven by pain he couldn't release, the other by love he refused to abandon. The night would belong to whichever force proved stronger. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The rumble started as a distant thunder, growing louder as 20 motorcycles roared through the darkening streets of Evergreen Harbor. Blade led the formation, his black Harley cutting through the evening air like a blade. Behind him, the remaining Crimson Riders fell into practiced positions, but their usual precision was ragged, their confidence shaken. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood calmly at the intersection near the lemonade stand, his posture relaxed but alert. Tom Sullivan and a dozen other townspeople had taken positions in doorways and behind parked cars, following Morrison's quiet instructions. "Remember," Jack's voice carried clearly through their borrowed radio sets, "we're not here to fight, we're here to end this." At Pacific Grove VA Hospital, Emma sat with Dr. Martinez, poring over Tyler Cooper's medical records. "The experimental evacuation procedure," Sarah explained gently, "it would have been too risky. Even if we'd gotten him out immediately, his injuries were too severe. Command didn't delay because of discrimination. They were protecting their men. A hot zone evacuation would have cost more lives, but Blade doesn't know that. He wouldn't listen. Grief can make us deaf to truth sometimes." The motorcycles drew closer, their combined roar now drowning out all other sounds. Officer Rivera positioned her 3 available patrol cars strategically, following Morrison's plan. "Never thought I'd be taking orders from a SEAL on Main Street," she muttered. "Sometimes the best soldiers," Jack's voice crackled through the radio, "are the ones who prevent wars instead of fighting them." Blade's phone buzzed in his jacket. The number was unfamiliar, but he knew who it would be. He pulled over, signaling his crew to hold position. "Morrison!" Blade growled. The voice was calm, measured. "There's something you need to know about." "Tyler! Don't you dare say his name!" Blade's grip tightened on his handlebars. "You military types always thinking you deserve special treatment while my brother died waiting." "He didn't die waiting, Blade. He died protected. Command saved him from more suffering. Dr. Martinez has the records. The evacuation you wanted, it wouldn't have worked." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the idle rumble of motorcycles. "You're lying." But doubt crept into Blade's voice. "I've never lied about death, Blade. Seen too much of it to disrespect it that way." 2 Crimson Riders quietly broke formation, cutting their engines and removing their patches. Others watched, uncertainty visible in their postures. "Boss," Switchblade's voice carried over their channel, "maybe we should—" "Enough!" Blade gunned his engine. "Anyone who runs is out, permanently." But 3 more bikes peeled away, their riders choosing uncertainty over violence. Blade screamed into the night, pain and rage mixing into something primal. The remaining bikes roared forward, but Morrison stood his ground. Tom and the others tensed, but stayed hidden as instructed. "Wait," Jack commanded through the radio. "Let them come to us." Blade's formation burst into the intersection like a wave of black leather and chrome. They circled Morrison, chains rattling, but he remained still, his eyes fixed on their leader. "You think this changes anything?" Blade killed his engine, dismounting. "You think coming back early saves your kid's little charity project?" "This isn't about the lemonade stand," Morrison's voice carried. "This is about Tyler." The name hit Blade like a physical blow. Some of his remaining riders shifted uncomfortably. "Boss," Snake called out, "those files Dr. Martinez showed me, maybe we should—" "Traitor!" Blade whirled, pulling a heavy chain from his belt. "All of you, turning on your own family!" The chain whipped through the air towards Snake, but Morrison's movement was faster. His hand caught the chain, wrapping it around his forearm as he stepped between them. "This ends now, Blade." Jack's voice remained steady. "Not with chains, not with violence, with truth." Dr. Martinez emerged from the shadows, holding Tyler's file. "He was my patient too, Blade. I was there every day. The evacuation you wanted, it would have been torture." "Lies." But Blade's voice cracked. "He needed help while they gave special treatment to terminal cases," Sarah cut in. "Military family or not, Tyler's case was different. We were trying to save him from pain, not deny him care." More bikes shut down, more riders stepping away. Blade spun in a circle, watching his authority crumble. "You don't understand!" His voice rose to a shout. "He was all I had, and they just let him die with dignity," Morrison finished quietly, "instead of in agony. Sometimes the hardest kind of love is letting go." Switchblade dismounted, removing his patch. "Boss, remember what you told me when you found me? Pain either breaks us or builds us. Maybe it's time to build something different." The night air grew thick with possibility. Blade stood alone now, his remaining loyal riders watching uncertainly. The chain hung limp in his hand. "Read the file," Dr. Martinez urged gently. "Read about how hard we tried to make him comfortable. About how he asked us not to tell you about the evacuation's real risks. He was protecting you, Blade, like you always protected him." From the hospital window above, Emma watched with Michael, their breath fogging the glass. "Sometimes people just need to remember who they really are," she whispered, echoing her father's words. The chain slipped from Blade's fingers, clattering on the asphalt like the last echo of violence. But the night wasn't finished with Evergreen Harbor yet. Sometimes the hardest battles come after the fighting stops. when it's time to rebuild what pain has broken, and in the growing quiet, as former enemies faced hard truths and harder choices. The real test of strength was just beginning. The first light of dawn found Blade Cooper sitting alone in Pacific Grove's chapel, Tyler's medical file open in his trembling hands. Each page told a story he hadn't been ready to hear 2 years ago, of doctors fighting to balance treatment with comfort, of his brother's quiet courage in protecting him from the truth. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood in the doorway, giving the man space while ensuring others did the same. Through the chapel's stained glass, morning light painted patterns across the floor like scattered hopes waiting to be gathered. He knew, Blade's voice was raw, he knew the evacuation would only hurt him worse. But I kept pushing, kept demanding, because that's what love does. It fights, Jack said quietly, even when there's no fight left to win. Outside the hospital, former Crimson Riders members gathered uncertainly. Some still wore their leather vests, but the patches had been removed, leaving lighter squares where symbols of intimidation once lived. Switchblade approached Morrison as he exited the chapel. What happens now? To us? To him? That depends on choices, Jack's voice carried. No judgment. The ones you've already made and the ones still coming. Across town, Emma's lemonade stand became a symbol of something new. Former gang members, their faces still haunted by night's revelations, helped repair the remaining damage. Each hammer strike felt like penance, each brushstroke like possibility. Mom believed in second chances, Emma told them as she served lemonade. She said everyone deserves a chance to remember who they were before pain changed them. Tom Sullivan watched from his store as men who'd threatened him days before now worked alongside his regular customers. Never thought I'd see the day, he muttered to Officer Rivera. Sometimes the biggest changes, Maria replied, come from the smallest acts of kindness. Dr. Martinez sat with Blade in her office, going through Tyler's case in detail. Medical terms and timestamps painted a picture of care rather than neglect, of hard choices made with compassion rather than cruelty. The emergency evacuation, she explained gently, had a 0% survival rate in similar cases, but the pain levels, she shook her head. Tyler made the choice to spend his remaining time alert, able to be with you. He chose quality of life over false hope. Why? Didn't anyone tell me? The whisper carried decades of pain. We tried, but grief can make us hear only what feeds our pain. She touched his hand. Tyler's last words were about you, about hoping you'd find peace. Eleanor Chen organized a community meeting. At the diner, where former enemies sat together over coffee, awkwardness slowly giving way to cautious conversation. Town's got plenty of work needs doing, Tom announced. Legal work for anyone wanting to earn honest pay. Some former gang members straightened in their seats, hope flickering in eyes, long dulled by anger and regret. At the lemonade stand, Michael sat in a wheelchair, enjoying fresh air and sunshine while his treatment allowed. 3 former Crimson Riders lingered nearby, watching children play with a mixture of shame and longing. Want to learn how to make lemonade? Emma asked them. Mom's secret recipe. She always said bitter things can become sweet with enough care and patience. Lieutenant Commander Morrison found Blade at Tyler's grave later that morning. The biker's massive frame seemed smaller somehow, bowed under the weight of truth rather than rage. I've been fighting the wrong battle, Blade said without turning, all this time. The hardest enemy, Jack replied, is the story we tell ourselves about our pain. Back in town, transformation continued in small ways. Switchblade organized younger members to help elderly residents with yard work. Snake, once feared for his quick temper, now directed traffic around road repairs with careful patience. Officer Rivera watched it all, making notes for her report. Still got to answer for crimes, she told Morrison. Can't just ignore laws broken. No, Jack agreed. But justice and redemption aren't mutually exclusive. Sometimes they're the same path. Dr. Martinez found Emma at her stand, counting the day's donations. The VA got an anonymous contribution this morning, she said with a meaningful smile. Enough to upgrade 3 physical therapy stations. Emma looked up as Blade's distinctive motorcycle rumbled past. But this time, instead of fear, the sound carried a different meaning. The rider lifted his hand in a small wave, receiving cautious waves in return. "It's not fixed yet, is it?" Emma asked her father as they closed the stand that evening. "All the hurt, all the mistakes." "No, honey." Jack helped her pack away the mason jars. "Some healing takes time, but the hardest step is the first one, choosing to change." As sunset painted Evergreen Harbor in gentle colors, former Crimson Riders gathered at their clubhouse one last time. The wall of photographs remained, but now Tyler's picture held a different message, not of vengeful rage, but of remembered love. "We can't stay what we were," Switchblade addressed the group, "but maybe we can become something better." One by one, they placed their patches in a pile, not burning them. That would be too easy, too quick. Instead, they would keep them as reminders of how pain can twist good intentions, how strength can be misused, and how it's never too late to choose a different road. The night settled over the town like a gentle hand, cooling the day's labors. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new opportunities for both failure and redemption. But for now, in the space between what was and what could be, Evergreen Harbor breathed easier. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating an enemy, but in helping them find their way home. The Evergreen Harbor Community Center buzzed with tense energy as former Crimson Riders filed in, trading leather vests for clean shirts. Town council members shifted in their seats, watching men they'd once feared now taking chairs with uncertain humility. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood at the back, observing. Change was never easy, and trust had to be earned one small step at a time. "This is a mistake," Mr. Peterson from the bank declared, standing abruptly. "These men terrorized our town, and now we're supposed to just forgive and forget?" "Not forget," Jack's calm voice cut through the murmurs, "and not just forgive, but choose to build something better than revenge." Blade entered last, his massive frame somehow diminished by regular clothes and the weight of recent revelations. He carried a thick envelope. "This is everything," he said, placing it before the council. "Protection money, extortion records, names of everyone involved, including myself. Do what you need to do." Officer Rivera examined the contents, sharing quiet words with the district attorney. The law demanded justice, but sometimes justice wore different faces. At her lemonade stand, Emma served drinks to an unusual mix of customers. Former gang members stood awkwardly beside business owners, sharing uncomfortable smiles over plastic cups. "Your mom's recipe?" Switchblade asked, sipping carefully. "With one change," Emma smiled. "Added a little extra honey, sometimes bitter, and things need extra sweetness to change." Dr. Martinez presented Tyler Cooper's case to the hospital board, this time with Blade present. Medical terminology and treatment protocols painted a clear picture of care rather than negligence. The command decision, she explained, while painful, actually spared Tyler months of suffering. Their delay wasn't about discrimination, it was about preventing unnecessary pain. Blade's hands gripped his chair's armrests. "I needed someone to blame," he whispered. "Couldn't just accept that sometimes. Sometimes there are no villains. Just life and death and hard choices." Tom Sullivan surprised everyone by offering jobs to 3 former gang members. "My back ain't what it used to be," he grumbled. "Need strong arms for deliveries." "But one step out of line?" "No, sir," they chorused, understanding the gift of opportunity they were being offered. Morrison found Snake practicing job interviews in the community center mirror. Never done this before, the former enforcer admitted. Always use fear to get what I needed. Fear's easy, Jack replied. Respect, that's something you earn. Ready to earn it? Not everyone supported the changes. A group of business owners led by Mr. Peterson demanded stricter punishment. They're criminals, he protested at the town meeting. They should be in jail, not working in our stores. Some will face charges, Officer Rivera acknowledged. But others are choosing a different path. Shouldn't we support that choice? Eleanor Chen's voice rose from the back. I remember when this town believed in redemption, when we helped folks who wanted to change. When did we lose that? The VA hospital's physical therapy ward became unexpected common ground. Former gang members, now volunteering under strict supervision, helped maintain the gardens where patients took their daily walks. You're doing it wrong, Michael instructed Switchblade from his wheelchair, watching the big man struggle with delicate flower beds. Got to be gentle with the roots. Like my nurse says, healing takes patience. Emma expanded her stand's mission, now raising funds for both the VA and community rehabilitation programs. Her father's proud smile carried a hint of sadness. She was growing up faster than he'd expected. Sometimes light comes from the darkest places, she told a reporter who'd come to cover the town's transformation. That's what Mom always said. The first major test came when riders from a neighboring gang rolled into town, expecting to find their usual allies. Instead, they found Blade and his former members standing with the community. Evergreen Harbor is changing, Blade told them firmly. You want trouble, find it somewhere else. The visitors revved their engines threateningly, but faced with united opposition, they eventually backed down. It was the first time the reformed gang members had protected the town instead of threatening it. Later that evening, Morrison found Blade sitting at Emma's lemonade stand long after closing. Never thought I'd be on this side of things, Blade admitted, defending instead of destroying. The strongest defenders, Jack replied, are often those who understand the cost of destruction firsthand. The town's transformation continued in small ways. Former enemies learned to work together, finding common ground in shared labor and shared purpose. But trust grew slowly, like Michael's garden, requiring constant attention and care. It's not just about changing what we do, Switchblade told the youth group he'd started mentoring. It's about changing who we choose to be. As night settled over Evergreen Harbor, the community center lights stayed on late. Inside, former gang members attended GED classes, job training, and counseling sessions. The road ahead was long, but each small step forward proved that different choices were possible. Emma's last customer of the day was a small girl who'd once feared walking past the lemonade stand. Now she came running up with a handful of coins and a bright smile. My daddy says you helped the scary men become good, she said, dropping her money in the donation jar. Is that true? Emma shared a look with her father before answering. They were always good inside, she replied. They just forgot for a while. Sometimes people need help remembering who they really are. The truth of her words echoed through the evening air, touching souls still learning to believe in second chances. Because sometimes the greatest change isn't in what we do, but in how we see ourselves and others. And in Evergreen Harbor, that change was just beginning. 1 month after the confrontation that changed Evergreen Harbor forever, 17 former Crimson Riders stood before their first job training graduation ceremony. The audience included faces that once inspired fear, now radiating pride and purpose. Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched from the stage, remembering the night when choosing understanding over vengeance had transformed not just lives, but an entire community. Blade, now working with the VA's outreach program, addressed a group of troubled teens at the community center. These were the kids who once would have been Crimson Riders recruits, angry, lost, looking for belonging in all the wrong places. Strength isn't about making others fear you, he told them, his voice carrying the weight of hard-learned wisdom. Took me losing everything to learn that. Maybe you can learn it easier." Morrison watched from the doorway, noting how the teens leaned forward, drawn to the authenticity of Blade's story. Sometimes the most powerful teachers were those who'd walked the darkest paths. At Tom's hardware store, Switchblade and 2 other former gang members were proving themselves valuable employees. Their knowledge of motorcycles had unexpectedly transformed the store's small engine repair shop into a thriving business. "Never thought I'd say this," Tom admitted to Morrison, "but they're bringing in customers from 3 towns over. Honest work, fair prices, and they know their stuff." Emma's lemonade stand had evolved into something larger than anyone expected. Local businesses now matched every donation, and she'd started a program called Sweet Second Chances, hiring reformed gang members to help run satellite stands at community events. "It's what Mom would have wanted," she explained to a documentary crew covering the town's transformation. She always said, "Every soul deserves sunlight to grow." But not everything was smooth transition and easy change. Mr. Peterson's faction on the town council continued pushing for stricter penalties rather than rehabilitation. "They're taking jobs from honest citizens," he protested during a heated meeting. "How do we know this isn't just some long con?" "Because we're watching," Officer Rivera responded calmly. "And what we're seeing is men choosing to be better, despite folks like you waiting for them to fail." Dr. Martinez had implemented new protocols at Pacific Grove VA Hospital, inspired by Tyler Cooper's case. "We're improving communication with families," she explained to the board, "making sure they understand treatment decisions so no one else suffers from misunderstanding like Blade did." The former Crimson Riders clubhouse was being renovated into a community youth center. Snake, now certified in construction safety, supervised the work crew of former members. "Tearing down's easy," he told his team as they removed the old gang symbols. "Building something good, that takes skill and patience." Morrison established a veteran support group that included both former military and reformed gang members. "Different uniforms, same struggles," he explained, "learning to live in peace after living in conflict." Blade attended every session, quietly at first, then gradually opening up about Tyler, about his choices, about the weight of leading men down the wrong path. "Hardest part isn't changing yourself," he shared one evening. "It's facing all the people you hurt along the way." Michael's garden at the hospital had flourished under unlikely care. Former intimidators now gently tended flowers, learned plant names, helped young patients discover the joy of growing things. "See this rose?" Switchblade showed a young girl in a wheelchair. Looked pretty hopeless last month, but with the right care, right support. Amazing what can bloom. Chen organized weekly community dinners where former enemies broke bread together. Awkward silences gradually gave way to cautious conversations, then genuine connections. "Food has a way of reminding us we're all just people," she said, watching Blade help an elderly resident carry her plate. But Evergreen Harbor's newfound peace faced its first real test when 3 trucks carrying hospital supplies were hijacked. On the highway, the old Crimson Riders would have seen opportunity. The reformed men saw something else. "Those supplies," Blade said during the emergency community meeting, "they're for kids like Michael, kids like Tyler was. We know these roads better than anyone. Let us help." Officer Rivera hesitated. "You understand what you're asking? If this is a trick..." "No tricks," Switchblade stood beside his former boss. "Just a chance to protect instead of destroy." Morrison watched the exchange with careful eyes. "Sometimes trust has to be given before it's earned," he said quietly. "Question is, are we ready to give it?" The room fell silent as the town council debated. Lives literally hung in the balance. The hospital needed those supplies within 24 hours. Finally, Tom stood up. "I'll ride with them, keep an eye on things, but I think it's time we bet on hope instead of fear." As former gang members gathered their motorcycles for legitimate pursuit, the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The same bikes that once terrorized the town were now mobilizing to protect it. Emma watched them prepare from her lemonade stand. "They're going to do good, aren't they, Dad?" "Already are, kiddo," Morrison smiled. "Already are." The roar of motorcycles filled the evening air, but this time it carried a different message. Not of intimidation, but of community. Not of fear, but of protection. Because sometimes the greatest test of change isn't in dramatic moments of choice, but in quiet opportunities to prove who we've become. And Evergreen Harbor was about to discover just how deep that change ran. 5 years after a lemonade stand changed Evergreen Harbor forever, 17-year-old Emma Morrison stood at her high school graduation podium. The audience before her included faces that once inspired fear, now radiating pride and purpose. "My mother always said love was stronger than fear," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong. "But it wasn't until our town proved it that I truly understood what she meant." Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched his daughter from the stage, remembering the 12-year-old who refused to back down from darkness. Now she headed to college on a full scholarship, her community integration program implemented in over 200 cities. Pacific Grove VA Hospital had become a national center for patient advocacy. Dr. Martinez's program had transformed healthcare approaches across the country, ensuring no family faced medical challenges alone. Tyler's story, Sarah told the graduation gathering, didn't end with loss. It began a legacy of healing that continues to grow. Blade, now Director of National Rehabilitation Services, sat beside Switchblade. Their former rivalry transformed into one of the program's most powerful teaching tools. Together, they had helped thousands choose different paths. "Strange," Blade mused, watching young graduates in caps and gowns. "5 years ago, we thought power meant making people afraid. Now we know real power is helping people find courage." Michael, cancer-free and heading to medical school, led the student procession. The garden he started had grown into a national healing center, its methods studied by therapeutic programs worldwide. "Every flower has a story," he still told visitors. "Like every person has the potential to bloom in unexpected ways." Chen, silver hair now pure white, beamed with pride from her seat of honor. Her community integration methods had become standard practice in social work programs nationwide. It was never about the programs, she insisted to studying professionals. It was about believing in people's capacity to change, then helping them believe it too. Tom Sullivan's hardware store had spawned a national network of vocational training centers. Former gang members now owned successful businesses across the country, each one mentoring others toward legitimate success. "Quality builds trust," remained his motto, now inscribed on workshop walls nationwide. "Trust builds community. Community builds hope." Mr. Peterson, retiring from the town council, gave his final speech. "I was wrong," he admitted again, his honesty still powerful. "These men, this program, this transformation, they taught us what community really means." The vocational center, now a registered college, prepared to graduate its 1,000th student. Former Crimson Riders members had become instructors, teaching skills alongside life lessons. "Success isn't just about learning trades," Blade told new arrivals. "It's about learning to believe in possibility again." The hospital gardens bloomed with special beauty that graduation day. Patients and caregivers gathered among flowers planted by hands that once dealt only in destruction. "Sarah would love this," Dr. Martinez told Morrison softly, seeing how pain transformed into purpose. Lieutenant Commander Morrison received national recognition but kept his focus local. "Awards are nice," he told reporters, "but real success is in changed lives, rebuilt futures, restored hope." Emma's graduation speech continued, her words touching hearts that had learned to feel again. 5 years ago, A simple lemonade stand showed us that sweetness can overcome bitterness, that love truly is stronger than fear. The Evergreen Harbor model had reformed criminal justice approaches nationwide. Cities reported dramatic drops in gang activity when implementing their rehabilitation methods. Because we stopped fighting darkness, Officer Rivera explained at law enforcement conferences, and started lighting the way towards something better. The graduation ceremony became a celebration of transformation itself. Former enemies embraced as family, their children playing together, their futures intertwined in purpose. Michael led the graduates in their traditional visit to Tyler's garden. Sometimes the seeds of change, he told them, grow in the most unexpected places. As evening approached, Emma returned to her original lemonade stand location. The simple wooden structure remained, now a National Historic Landmark. "Still sweet enough?" Morrison asked softly, accepting a cup from his daughter. "Getting sweeter. All the time," she replied, understanding he meant more than just the drink. The sunset painted Evergreen Harbor in familiar colors, but the town it illuminated had been transformed. Fear had given way to hope, hatred to understanding, darkness to dawn, because sometimes the greatest changes aren't in dramatic moments, but in daily choices that add up to complete transformation. And in Evergreen Harbor, those choices had created something extraordinary, proof that love truly was stronger than fear. As stars appeared above the changed landscape, new dreams took root in fertile soil. Because in Evergreen Harbor, they had learned that every sunset brought not just an ending, but the promise of another day to choose light over darkness. And in Tyler's garden, where it all began, flowers still bloomed in the gentle night, proving that even the hardest ground could nurture hope when tended with patience and love. The story of Evergreen Harbor would continue, not just in programs replicated or policies changed, but in lives transformed, hope restored, and the enduring truth that love, when chosen day after day, truly was stronger than any fear. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot to us.